In this project, I'm going to go and install ownCloud on an Ubuntu server. We're going to go through. I want to go through the steps that I took to get it up and running. So before we start, there's a couple of things we're going to go through and download everything we need to get this thing up and running. So obviously the first thing is Ubuntu. So what we're going to do is go to the Ubuntu website. Just go and download the version that you want. In this scenario, I'm not actually going to use the desktop version because that installs a lot of the user interface, and it's a bit like Windows 7 desktop, so it needs a bit more resources. So if you're going to use an old computer to set this up, we don't need the GUI because once we've installed it, we don't need to touch it again a lot anyway. And if we do, we can get things done via the command line. So in this scenario, this example, I'm going to go and use the Ubuntu server. So the latest one is 12.10. Click on that. It'll download an ISO. So the ISO, I've already done it. So download that, and obviously just burn that onto a CD. It's about just under 700 megs, so it's a CD. The next thing we want to download is obviously ownCloud, but what we can do from here is if we go install your own. So what we do over here is we want the Linux packages. So over here, obviously we've got Ubuntu. You know, if you're using one of these other ones, click on other ones, but it'll take you to Ubuntu. And what this page does is when we get our system up and running, we'll run some of these commands, and then we can actually just download the latest version of ownCloud straight from the repository. The other thing we want is PuTTY. So what we do is we'll use PuTTY to log into our Ubuntu server once it's configured. So go ahead, download that. And the last thing that I use quite often is Notepad++. So it's a great replacement for Windows Notepad. And the way I'm going to do it is that, you know, because I haven't used Linux in a long time, I'm not that familiar with it, but we don't need to know a lot of commands to get this configured. But what we can do is we can set up a share where all the config files are, and you can actually modify all your config files through Windows using Notepad or whatever you want. So they're the main things. So just go ahead and download that and prepare that, and we'll go and install the server. I'll go through that, and then we'll come back and we'll start configuring it to install ownCloud. Okay, so once we've downloaded that ISO and burnt it to CD, we're just going to go and boot it up. So make sure that in your BIOS the boot is that it's set to this CD first. Okay, so let's just go through and boot it up. Okay, I'm going to select finish to install server. Okay, so we go next. Choose where you're from. So do you have a keyboard layout detected by pressing? I'm just going to go no because I've got a pretty standard keyboard. Fine, let's see what else. Keyboard, okay. So I'm just going to let it go through in real time. So in the initial stages, everything will be obviously just DHCP. Change that. So change the host name. As you can see, it's default to Ubuntu. You can change it wherever you want. I'm gonna call it ownCloud. So set up users and passwords. So put in a full name for the user, username, password. I've just made a really basic password. Make it anything you want. Use weak password. I'm just going to yes. If you want to encrypt, it's up to you. This scenario, I'm just going to go leave everything at default. So it's auto detected. Yes. That's my time zone. Partitioning message, yep, I'm just going to go default. Select disk, it's picked up that disk, default. Before the logical volume manager can be configured, the current partitioning scheme has to be written to disk. And the changes cannot be done. Write changes to disk, yes. Yep, full partition. I've only got one hard drive in here for the purposes of this. So just everything default is usually fine. So just go yes. So we basically wait. There's nothing really fancy about it, but I'm just going to let it run through. In case this is you've never installed a Linux system or Ubuntu before, just so that you can actually see what the whole install looks like. Remember that this is the Ubuntu server, so there's no desktop, there's no GUI, it's all command line. But that's okay, even if you've never used Linux before. We'll go through the commands later, and there's only a few commands that you really need to learn to configure the system. So it's not too bad, even for someone who's never used Linux before. And what we'll actually do is we'll actually share some of the config paths so that you can actually edit the configuration files in Windows if you prefer, if you're more comfortable with it. It's not a whole lot to look at here, but there are some configuration options later that makes it a lot easier to go through with the ownCloud installation. So I don't have a proxy, just leave blank, go enter. Okay, so I'm going to go no automatic updates. Okay, so here, it's important here to make it a bit easier. What we need to do is make sure we select the first one, Open SSH. I don't need that. LAMP, very important. LAMP is the equivalent of Windows WAMP, so it's just the Apache, MySQL, and PHP. So we need that for ownCloud. The other one is Samba. Make sure you do that, and that's all we want from here. I mean, you can go ahead and install print server, mail server, any of the other stuff that you want, but for this purpose, for ownCloud, they're the only ones that I'm going to select. Okay, so this is important. So it's asking to set a password in the MySQL root user. So you can actually leave it blank, as that's the default, but probably recommended to put in a password. So remember the password too, don't forget, otherwise it's a bit of a pain. So this is for the root user for MySQL database. Okay, so since it's the only installation on this computer, I'm just going to say yes, I want to install Grub. Okay, so take the CD out and reboot. So the installation is done. So let's just reboot. Okay, so now basically we're just going to boot up into the into Linux Ubuntu. There's not a lot to look at because it's all command prompt only. No Windows GUI, no user interface at all, basically. Sorry, it's just loading. Don't know if you can hear that, but the computer is just, the hard drive is just running and loading. But the good thing about it is that once this boots up, that's it. We don't need a monitor or a keyboard for this system anymore. So you can unplug everything, and we can remotely access the server from a Windows machine and run it, configure everything from there. So that's pretty much it. That's the login. I'll log in here just to show you. So we'll just go that user we created before. And that's it. That's the Ubuntu server installed. So now, like I said, we can turn off the monitor, unplug the keyboard, everything. We'll jump onto a Windows PC and we'll log in remotely to configure it. but you can see there I've got an IP address, got 6% memory usage. This computer's got 1.5 gig of RAM, used nearly 2% of the hard drive. Alright, that's pretty much it, so we'll jump onto PC and we'll continue to configure it. Okay, so now that we've downloaded everything and we've got the uBuntu server running, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the Windows PC and we're going to log in remotely to configure and set up the server to run ownCloud. So when you run PuTTY, this is what you'll see. Don't worry about those other sessions. So when you run Ubuntu for the first time, it'll actually tell you what its IP address is, as we saw on the screen. So you go ahead and punch in the IP address here, or just the host name. And in this case, I'm just going to punch in the host name. Put on SSH, leave it port 22, click open. What you'll see is that the first time it'll come up with it's not cached in the registry. All you do is go yes, and over here you'll see the login screen. So I'm going to go ahead and log in as me. So that's it. So basically we are logged in remotely onto the server, and as you can see, there's no user graphical interface. Everything is command line. But the advantages of it is that it's a very small install, and theoretically speaking, once we have it configured, we won't need to log in all that often to do much to it, unless we want to upgrade or update stuff on the server. So it's actually quite ideal. So the first thing I'm going to do is go and change it from DHCP to a static IP address, so that we always know where we're going to access it. So how we're going to do that is I've got some notes which I'm going to just copy and paste on the screen. So what we're going to do is, the first thing to do is, with Ubuntu there's no root user per se, so everybody's just a user. But if we need to use root commands, we prefix everything with the sudo command. So what we're going to do is go and change the network config. So in file. So first time it's going to ask for the password. Okay, so in here what you can see is that it's set to DHCP. So if you've never used Linux before, it's a little bit tricky. You can't use the numpad, so you've just got to use the numbers across the top of the keyboard. So what we want to do is, I'm just going to leave this, but I'm going to hash it out. Type in, this new command, address, address is, I'm going to make it 168.1.10. You only have to do this once. Network is 192.168.1.0. Not used to typing so much these days. 192.1.255, and lastly is just the gateway. I haven't used Linux for quite a while. Okay, so that's all we need to do to change it from DHCP to a static IP address. The gateway. So obviously put in your own settings there, and to save it, two things we can do is Control O is write, and then enter, or Control X will exit it. But if you don't write it, you Control X, it'll ask you to save it on exit. The other thing we need to do is to change the DNS settings, so for it to resolve. So nope, that's fine. Name server. So that's it. So what we need to do now is we need to restart the network to the interface so that it'll take on the new IP address. So type in that, and we're actually going to lose connection here, and then we'll just connect back in. Okay, so because it's dropped the network connection, we've lost it. So I'm just going to close it, and I'm just going to rerun PuTTY, but this time instead of putting in a hostname, because we've just changed the IP address without refreshing it, I'm just going to punch in, the IP address, and you'll see it's come up with another error saying that the service host key does not match, but that's fine, we know it's us. So log in as me, and you'll see now the IP address is now 10 as we've set it. Okay, so now that's done, what we're going to do is we're going to go in and add the ownCloud repository into Ubuntu so that we can just download the latest and install it straight onto the server without going and downloading it. Okay, so go back to the ownCloud Ubuntu repository here. So we're going to follow a couple of these instructions. Okay, what I'll do is I'll set it up so we can cut and paste. Okay, so what we want to do is, so we're running 12.10, so what we want to do is we want to copy that, and over here put in sudo, and then copy it. Okay, see how I had a couple of these issues before, so what we'll need to do is we'll need to either do it manually, or we need to go and just create that file. So I'm just going to go and here goes to create it. We're going to put in the path. Then, because that file does not exist, usually it should create it, but it's not. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and create the file, and we'll manually copy in what's in between the two quotation marks there. So copy it over here, delete that. So if I go Control X, down the bottom you'll see it says save modified. If you just go yes, that means it'll go and create that list, that file now. I just saw an error. So let's just go back here. Okay. So now that file's created with that command in it. What we type in here is get. We update the the repositories. So we just wait for that to finish. Shouldn't take too long. This is one of the beautiful things about the Linux these days is, well, they've had it for a while, is they've all got this version of this package managers, which actually pulls it straight down from the servers, so that you can just install stuff straight from the server. So okay, so we got that little error, which is fine. Following signatures can be verified. Public key is not valid, no public key. So what we need to do is we need to copy and paste this. Again, paste. That'll get the key. So it says key saved. And then now we run this command. Okay. So if we go and do an update again, we shouldn't have an error with the key. I'm going to copy that in preparation. And in Linux, if you right click on the command line over here, it'll automatically paste what you've got in the clipboard, so there's no copy paste per se. So if I right click, it copies straight on there. I press enter. Again, I keep forgetting. So this will go ahead and it'll actually tell you that, you know, it needs all these extra applications, and then it says new packages will be installed. These ones will be upgraded. So for upgraded, 15 installed, 74 will not be upgraded. It'll download 19.9 megs of archives. After this operation, there'll be an extra 44.1 megs of additional space. Do you want to continue? Go yes. And it goes off and it finds everything it needs to install ownCloud. It's pretty simple. The biggest difference I found between this installing this and the Windows WAMP is basically, obviously, just some of the commands. You have to use Linux commands, but on top of that, everything else is very similar. The process is very similar to install and configure. The biggest difference is in Linux, the config files are usually just placed in a different place. So, you know, once you get used to looking for it, it's actually not that different to configuring it to the Windows one. So just let that run. Okay, so it's finished. So ownCloud should be set up. Okay, so now that that's installed, we should really just be able to then go open up a new tab, punch in HTTP, the IP address, as you can see, and then /ownCloud. And what you'll actually see is that it's this will be the first instance to log in. So obviously there's a warning. So this is the first instance, and you'll get this in the first instance. So it says ask admin account. I'm just going to create, for this purpose, an admin account called admin. If you clicked on advanced, this is the location of the data. So you can change that to whatever you want, but in this scenario I'm just going to leave it there for simplicity's sake. And then we can configure the database and use either SQLite or MySQL. Either one will work. I'm going to use MySQL, the one that we actually set up while we were installing Ubuntu Server before. So the user is just the root user. Put in the password that you punched in before. Create a database name. I'm just going to call it ownCloud. Leave localhost and click finish setup. This first instance might take a while, so just wait. Well, there you go. Didn't take as long as I remembered, but that's fine. So really, at the end of the day, that's pretty cool. But that's it. We've installed ownCloud on your own Ubuntu server. So obviously, there's nothing here. We can upload, and it's running. It's not secure, but it is running, and you can actually go ahead and install a client now on a client station, and then it'll sync with here. So that's pretty much it in terms of the basic setup. What I'll go through now is how to install and activate SSL so that we have secure logins. Alright, and be right back.